Hello, in this video I'm going to talk a bit about this Skull Island 3D printed model that I've painted and embellished. The model is by Kijai, and I've linked to the STL in the description below. I've also linked to another couple of videos where I go over my materials in a technique video for a technique I use to get the stone effect on the mountain, also in the description below. So we'll just get into the brief kind of run through of how I finished this model, and I will start with cleaning up the model off the print bed. This model printed completely supportless and it was perfect off the print bed. I didn't need to do a thing to it. That's not always the case, but this one just definitely printed absolutely beautifully. The next thing I did was I primed the whole thing with some grey paint, and I brushed that on, just acrylic paint, and I let that dry for a day to make sure it was completely dry before adding additional colours. The next thing I did was I started blocking in my colours. Now, there's really only 3 areas to block colours in on this particular model. The first is obviously all the stone all over for the mountain, and that was grey. Well, it was already grey from being primed, so I actually just glopped on some white and black paint directly on the model. It's getting a bit difficult to see. There we go. So yeah, I mixed the black and white paint directly on the model and kind of just blobbed it on to create additional texture. The other area where I blocked in colour was I put some brown on here for the sandy beach. I knew I wanted to add sand to it later, but you always need to put a base color in even if you're going to put static grass or whatever down on top of it, because little bits will show through and they'll ruin the illusion if you don't give it a base color. The last area I needed to block in was the water, and I did that in blue with a tiny bit of brown around the edges. Because I wanted to create some kind of illusion of depth. Now, I suppose I also painted the waterfall blue to start. Now, after that was all dry, I added in my shadows, and the shadows were really important in the eye sockets, in the nose, in these little cavey bits. You definitely want it to be nice and dark, and there's some other kind of crevices all around the mountain. And I just applied a black wash to darken up all of those nooks and crannies, and definitely a black wash all down the steps so that I could highlight them afterwards, and that would really make them stand out as a separate feature. So after the washes and the shadows were all dry, I went in and I added a few more details to the water. There's a bit of mixing here with some white on top of the blue to give the illusion that there's a bit of spray and foam. And I also added in a bit of white and blue mixed on the waterfall to make sure that those details were taken care of. Then it was time to add in my highlights, and there wasn't a terribly huge amount of highlighting to this model. I did a little bit around the face here, a little bit at the top of the mountain, and definitely on the stairs, just to bring out those ridges, made them stand out really well. Oh, there's also a little waterfall here I forgot about, which was treated the exact same way as the large waterfall. So yeah, not a lot of highlighting because I basically did all of that when I glopped on the paint to create that stony texture. Then I wanted to add a bit of green, so I dry brushed green in some select areas. Everywhere you see moss, is kind of places where I added green paint first to give that underlying color. Um, and really that was it for the painting side of things. So once that was all dry, I was ready to move on to my additional little embellishments. Now I have this great sand that I got a while ago, and it's got actual like little bits of seashell right in the sand, and I thought that would be perfect for this little beach. And that's one of my favorite features of the whole model. Um, this model was actually created from a sketch I'd made, and I gave it to the designer Kijai, and he basically just made it three-dimensionally, made it gorgeous and, you know, better than I'd imagined. But in my sketch, one of the things I was really specific about was there was a little beach here, and I'm really glad that he added it in because I wasn't sure that he would. But it makes sense to me that, you know, there's a little beach and you kind of row in, and then there's this little mountain coming out. So it tells a story to me. So yeah, there's shells on the beach. Well, there's shell fragments, but it's real beach sand. I used nail flocking powder to create a moss in all of these green areas. It's a really, really fine powder, and you just apply that with PVA glue. Um, then once that was all dry, I did add some tiny little bits of clump foliage. Those are those raised green bits. Um, and I glued those in just to create some additional foliage and texture. And once that was all dry and I could handle the model again, I actually got some resin. I've had some resin for quite a while. I was experimenting with jewelry making. It didn't go so well. So yeah, I had resin, and I thought, oh, well, this would be the perfect model to try that on. So um, usually I'll use a bit of clear nail polish if I'm adding water effects to something very small, but this was quite big, and I thought, I'll go for it. I almost didn't because I was afraid to ruin it, but I am so happy with how it turned out. You can see the resin in the water. It's got that lovely shine to it. I also added it inside the mountain. You can see. Um, and it's down the waterfalls as well, so they all glisten, they all look wet. One thing I didn't do that I kind of wish I did was to rough up the resin as it was drying to create those little splashes and make them a bit more three-dimensional, but I just wasn't that brave, if I'm honest. Um, the only problem I did have was as I added the resin in the big bit back here, I didn't realize there was a little hole in the nose, and I think that's because I scaled the model down and a little hole is way up in the nose, and it started pouring down his face. So after the resin was all dry, or actually as it was drying, I was wiping away the wet bit to try and take away the shine coming all the way down the front here. But after it was all dry, I actually went in and repainted that to make it dull so that the shiny bits stand out more. Um, but you can still see the nose is a bit glistening. But yeah, that's just something to watch out for if you do put resin in there. But oh my god, it's just such a great model overall. It's one of my absolute favorites, and it's got a lot of great bits for painting. It also looks great straight off the print bed, but of course my thing is painting and embellishing, so that's what you get. Okay, that's all for now. Bye.